Chapter 9. Lexie followed Jay out of the terminal tunnel and onto the waiting jet that would finally take them to France. It had not even been a week in the planning, but it was nice to finally be on their way. Especially since the farewells with their family members had taken so long at the entrance. They both knew that they had a specific mission and goal to accomplish with this trip. Even with that in mind though, neither could completely ignore the thrill that ran through them as they took this first step on their journey. A few minutes later, they were settled in their seats and prepared for the long flight ahead of them. Any last-minute details that had slipped through the cracks, and they had yet to cover, could be put off for a little longer. Jay sat beside Lexie as people filed into the plane around them. Sometime later, the hulking aircraft-grade aluminum beast was pulled away from the terminal and slowly moved into position across the tarmac. The roar of the jet engines filled the air. An almost imperceptible rumbling bass accompanied the increasing noise. They were pushed back into their seats as the plane picked up speed and climbed into the air. For the first time in their young adult lives, they were flying and on their way to discover the truth about their lives. It was a truth that neither knew they needed, or even that there had been a question that needed to be answered. With the plane in the air, Jay leaned his chair back as far as he could without crushing the person sitting behind him and settled in for a nap. Lexie waited for him to close his eyes before she pulled out the book she had brought and began to read. Soon enough she would join him in sleep. It was a long flight, and they could not afford to waste time on being tired when they got there. They didn't have time to waste on jet lag. Anything they could do now to offset it would be helpful. The 12-hour flight passed in fits and spurts, a mix of slow and fast time as all trips seemed to. Lexie and Jay tried to nap the bulk of the time. During their time awake, they talked and chattered on about meaningless things. Playing card games to pass the time whenever the conversation lulled. The seat next to them was unfortunately empty. It was nice, since neither of them was a naturally outgoing person, but both would have appreciated the extra chance to talk to someone who hopefully knew France better than they did. The connection that they had shared as kids had never truly disappeared, as their recent time together was showing them. But it had changed. It was becoming something else. Spending as much time as they had during the last few days had allowed them to become friends as adults and to get to know one another again. Jay had never had many friends. His family had moved around far too much for that. There were people that he considered acquaintances, and people that he was friendly with. Just none that he had ever truly deemed interesting or worth staying in touch enough to be friends. The effort needed to keep and maintain the relationship in his ever-changing and moving life had just never seemed worth it. The number of people to this point in his life who had made the cut was exactly one person. That had changed when Lexie stepped back into his life. She was that one. Then somehow her aunt and a rather forgetful grandfather had both managed to become part of the remarkably select group of people he labeled as friends, and possibly more, in a small amount of time. Granted, the last person that he had truly thought of as a friend had been her, in any case. It was more than a little fitting that the damage that had been caused by losing touch with her was also fixed by reconnecting with her. It was easy to say that she was, without a doubt, his best friend. Having only 3 people that he considered friends took away much of the weight that statement normally held. There was a lack of viable candidates. Still, she held a firm claim to the position. He enjoyed spending time with her, doing absolutely anything and everything together. There was no one that either of them would rather be going to France with, and not just because the reasons for going involved them both. This adventure had meaning for them both, but more than that, it signified them taking a step forward in their otherwise stalled lives. When they returned home to America, they had no idea what would happen. No idea what would stay the same, and even less idea as to what would change, or whether those changes would be for better or worse. They did know that change was coming. They could only pray and hope that it was nothing that separated them again. The secrets that they were going to be looking into had the potential to cause a lot of damage. Not just to them, but to whoever had killed Lexie's parents. If they discovered anything worthwhile, and probably even if it wasn't, Lexie's grandfather, Alex, had been certain that the government would want to know everything that they had learned. All Alex had been able to tell them was that they had been operatives with the CIA. That inevitably meant that they knew secrets, and they were in the middle of an operation when they were killed. All of that meant whoever had killed them would do the same to them if the opportunity or need arose. Which if either Jay or Lexie were discovered to be back in France and looking into the murders, then their lives might be forfeit. None of that meant that they were going to be anything resembling safe while they were in France. If they were discovered, neither wanted to imagine what would happen to them beyond their lives being up for grabs. It was not like there was any government backing them that they could rely on for rescue if that happened. They were here on their own, with no one but themselves and 3 people thousands of miles back home to depend on. They had no friends or acquaintances in the country either, and they didn't even speak the language. They were truly going to be on their own, and that meant that every step taken needed to be made carefully and with the utmost attention to detail. Frankly, Jay was not sure if they had it in them to be that careful for any length of time. This entire expedition could be one giant exercise in being stupid and dying quickly, or at least getting captured quickly. There was information they needed here though, so they did not exactly have a choice in the matter. Not if they wanted answers. Maybe if things had been different, they could have planned better, or had some kind of training to fall back on in this kind of situation. They had no training and no fallback. The only things they had were each other and the training they both had in self-defense, and whatever bits of street smarts, book smarts, and intuition either might possess. Lexie had joined Jay at the gym several times during the last week, so they were at least familiar with their partner's abilities. Should the need arise, they would be able to handle themselves in a fight with a street thug. Fighting someone who had received the proper training, however, was another thing entirely. A voice came on over the intercom system, letting everyone know that the plane would be landing shortly and to please fasten their seatbelts. Jerked from his inner thoughts by the pilot's voice, Jay nudged Lexie awake,